What's going on, everyone? This is the Founder Hour podcast. I'm your co-host, Pat, and on today's episode, we sit down with Todd Carmichael. He's the founder of Colombe Coffee Roasters, one of the most innovative coffee brands ever, and the inventor of the first ever draft latte in a can, which he co-founded with his partner Jean-Philippe Berti in 1994. During our conversation, we cover everything from Todd's early days, growing up in Washington, being a distance runner and finishing a marathon at age 15, working at Starbucks when they had just 3 locations, why he wanted to start a coffee business and how Colombe came to fruition, and the unique approach they took to grow the company and pioneer a whole movement within coffee. Todd also shares what it was like to be the first person ever to walk across Antarctica on his own, a feat he accomplished in 2008, and how that experience shaped the way he approaches life and business. This was one of the most interesting conversations we've had on the show so far, and Todd's passion and energy is truly infectious. We kick things off by hearing a bit about Todd's childhood.
So long ago, it's maybe 3 or 4 versions of me ago. I was born and raised in small town America, in the state of Washington. Really kind of around the agricultural environment and big industry that was falling to pieces. So I came of age in that environment. Eventually, I made my way out of there to the big city of Seattle. I was an athlete. I was a distance runner. And so I got an entrance via athletics, and that helped me pay the tuition. I used that opportunity to study business. And at the same time, I had a part-time job working in the coffee world for a small company at the time called Starbucks. They had 3 cafes. They were planning on a 4th kind of place. And I worked in the factory roasting and dragging bags around. And I parlayed that into a life that I now continue to occupy. I've seen 3/4 of the world's countries, and I just pushed this little seed as far as it possibly could go until I'm sitting here talking with one of my favorite podcast guys.
I'm curious when sometimes when kids are young, they have this like grand vision or idea of what their adult life is going to look like and what they want to be when they grow up. Did you have any of that, or was it kind of just like your regular kid doing your thing and studying business and whatever comes?
No, I mean, in that environment, I could say that I felt like a fraud because really, what my direction was, I knew what I didn't want. And so I was able to eliminate all those things that I just did not want because I'd seen them up close. I was raised in poverty with a very sick mother, and there was really very little to my life other than trying to get to the next meal kind of thing. And I knew that I didn't want that. This was a time in America too, where, a bipolar mom with no education and 4 kids and has no rights, just really as a woman at the time, meant that life was very small. My world was very tiny, and I didn't want that little box. I wanted to see if I couldn't stretch the boundaries and kind of sneak outside that box and live outside that box.
Was there anyone, perhaps they were a well-known celebrity or just someone within your circle that you sort of looked up to and kind of gained that exposure of what life could look like? Had if you could become successful or do something big?
No one that I could know. I mean, no one that was within arm's reach. That came from my love of adventure and men like Shackleton and explorers, and so what I did was I kind of generated the perfect kind of hero in my mind from all these different characters in history that included, Newton and his amazing mind and his insanity combined with Shackleton and adventurers and explorers. And so I fancied that that's the type of person I wanted to become. And I could exercise that at a young age. With no parental oversight, I could go and do anything I want on any mountain within hitchhiking distance. So I would play these things out.
Mm-hmm. One of the coolest parts about this podcast and having done it for, at this point, 3+ years, is you get to see such a wide range of founders and a wide range of personalities. And, we talk about their backgrounds and their early days because that makes the founder very relatable to those that are listening to our stories and to this show. And, I'm curious, you talk about, growing up in poverty and growing up with a bipolar mom. As a kid, what did that make you feel, or how did you feel? And did you think that, that situation was going to be something that you were going to have for the rest of your life, or were you working so hard to try to get out of that environment?
Yeah. Well, I think what happens is at a very young age, you become a provider. I mean, so you have this drive to provide. As long as you have that ability, the family gets to stay together. So you have this incredible drive to provide for the family. You gain this ability to self-soothe your own problems, right? Because you can't add to the family's problems, right? So you have this challenge of like, correcting the things that are going around you in a way that it's very young. I mean, you can deal with things at a very young age better than most. And then finally, it was, I knew that I had one trip round, and I didn't want to spend the whole thing this way. I had this huge drive to, I had a globe. I had this globe that I used to stare at and memorize, and I wanted to go to every one of those colors. I didn't want to stay. So I knew, again, like what I didn't want. So it was those three things when you combine them together, kind of put you on your way. And then over time, I mean, you shift as a human, you evolve. But, that is the original kind of power booster that got me off the platform. And then you jettison that and you let another one fire, and you keep firing the next ones as you go. But that's the one that got me off the platform.
And did you have this idea that perhaps you could be like a professional athlete for the rest of your career? Or was that something that was not necessarily going to be like a career of yours? It was something that you were into when you were younger?
Well, what I noticed, there was this Olympian in my hometown, and he was one of the men who helped train me. And because I qualified for nationals, and I spent a lot of time. His name is Don Coran, and he got fourth, I think, in Munich in the marathon. He should have got the bronze, but anyway. And he worked at a shoe store, and so I recognized that distance running wasn't the place that was going to provide for my family the way I wanted, but I knew that it was a vehicle that didn't get me into the University of Washington, which in my little pocket of people, that was like saying, you were going to be getting your master's at Harvard. It was just untouchable. And it did. I just knew that I just had to be the fastest in all the states around me. And that was really a very simple feat, because distance running is very different than most sports. It's based on how much you put into it. It's not a God-given gift. It's something you scratch out of the soil for yourself. And I like that. And it's nothing that you have to wait to be picked, that you have to have your parents lobbying for you. You were the first one to the goal line, to the tape or not. And I loved the measurability of it. And I knew that if I put in X amount of work, that I could then be allowed to be where the other people are.
Todd, you talk about, college and what you studied, but I know that even before you did that, you were such an athletic guy, right? You also mentioned that, and you finished a marathon at 15 years old, right? Tell us a little bit about that and how you even got into that, and what that did to you and the rest of your life in terms of perhaps thinking about the long term, right? That life is a marathon, that your career is a marathon. But beyond that, did that set yourself up for more of those types of athletic adventures?
Oh yeah. I mean, once you get endurance in your soul, it never leaves you alone, and it becomes your modus. I mean, my people are used to hearing me say this: the winner is the last one standing. And it's how I approach everything. We accomplish our goals by wearing that mountain down. That's how we do it, right? Very few things that I value have come in epiphany, or it's always come by grinding. And then, later on, when I knew that I needed to shift my life into another gear, to go to that one of the final stages of this rocket, what I've been describing, was in 2008. And I needed to work something out of my system. And that was, I wanted to be the first man in history to walk solo across Antarctica and not die. And that's a 700-mile trek. It's hard. It's very hard. It's like,
and you did it, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I did it. And so I was the first to do it, which is a big deal in endurance, the first to achieve something. And when I touched the pole, I knew that's where I would shift. And I pivoted radically based on that, saying I'm now packaging up at least physical endurance and I'm moving it into a different arena.
Talk to us about that experience. I know it's a little later on in your journey and career, but since we're talking about this now, what was that experience in Antarctica like? And talk to us about some of those high points and maybe even some of those low points across, Antarctica. 700 miles is no joke, obviously, especially doing it alone. So, what was your mental state like? What was your physical state like? Give us some background here.
Okay, well, I mean, you go in huge. You have to be able to do 30-mile, like you should be able to do 2 marathons a day for 2 months. You got to be in that kind of endurance shape, but you have to have a lot of bulk on you because you're pulling 275 pounds behind you while you do this. And then you got to pack on as much fat as you can because that's what's going to keep you alive. So, I went in, I was a monster. I mean, I'm only a 200-pound dude, but I was like, dude, I felt like Arnold. And then, when you get dropped on the edge and that airplane leaves you and there's only you, it's 60 below, it's blowing at about 50 knots. And you say to yourself, oh crap, what have I done? I mean, that's, even if you put in 3 years work, I mean, you're ready, but your heart sinks because there's only one way out, man. And it's just hell between you and that exit door. And then for the next 3 to 5 to 6 days, you are still you. You're still that person who is used to seeing colors and have smells and eat warm food. And you're very still living in that Western experience, but you're forcing yourself to do something really unnatural. And you're falling in crevasses and getting yourself out. And then there's a transition. Then you become a more ancient version of yourself. You become what I call the beast. And this beast just kind of takes over and it doesn't get bored. It doesn't feel pain. It only gets one thing in its mind, and that is to go, 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 go. And it burns in you. And not any second. You're pulling 14 hours a day, and then you're putting your kit back together at night and, melting ice for water. And you never take a half a second until you reach the pole and you try to put that beast back in the box. That's kind of what it feels like.
Wow.
And
was there any point where like you felt like you weren't going to make it, or was it like were you able to pace yourself enough and sort of keep your mental state and sanity and physical health that the entire time you believed that you were going to get to the finish line? Yeah,
I mean, there were a lot of harrowing experiences. You can imagine. There are weeks on end where you can't see past your own hands. And it's not flat. It is just bumpy, and it is like picking through a junkyard. It's unforgiving, and it's the windiest place on earth, and the combination. But I never really felt that until about 3 days from the pole, because by then I'd lost about 65 pounds of my body weight.
Wow.
My legs were like where my arms used to be, kind of size, and you're mentally, you're just malnourished, you're sleep deprived, you're starting to tick on a different level, and things start going wrong. And I thought, fuck, I'm not going to make this, And then, over time, I developed a very severe case of frostbite in my lungs. So I only had by the time I hit the pole, I had about a quarter of my lung capacity left, and I couldn't breathe. I could breathe in, I just couldn't get it out again. And it's touch and go. But that's the trek. I mean, everyone knows it's a race. It's a race of attrition. You got to get there before you die.
And right. And speaking of human endurance, like this is obviously pretty extreme, but what, is there something that average people that aren't necessarily trying to put themselves in those conditions can do on a daily basis that could sort of, be similar? Obviously not the same, but something that could like help with endurance.
Well, endurance, it depends. Most everything could be a challenge. There was this fear that I would never let up, right? Because of the deserts and the mountains. And I said, no, when I'm 90, I want to see if I can't mow my lawn. It's just, that's going to be my challenge, right? Everybody has their own challenges. And, where you decide to exercise them depends on where you want to go. ultimately, I've always found this amazing beauty in the fact that I don't belong. As a kid, you feel like a fraud, right? And it was when I was 15, I did something that people like me didn't do. And I so enjoyed the fact that there was this juxtaposition. And it reminded me of these photos that I'd seen. My sister had showed me, right? It was these photos of these little red sofas. And the first page was a little red sofa in what looked like an artist loft in Soho, but like the real old Soho. And it was just beautiful, but everything was black and white except for the red sofa. And then as you turn the pages, that red sofa was in different places, like in a carved out canoe going down the Amazon. It was all like in a dune in Namibia. It was like this little red sofa became so much more beautiful when you took it out of its natural environment. And I thought, God, that's beautiful. That's me. I'm going to live my life that way. So when I'm standing at the South Pole, that's how I feel. I feel like that little red sofa, and I'm always looking for new places to put them.
So, Todd, I'm sure we're going to reference this Antarctica trek throughout this podcast because I think there's a lot of, parallels to draw on, and hopefully one day, if you write a book, you'll call it the Little Red Sofa. But getting back on, the professional, founder track, let's call it. You said you studied business in college. You mentioned you also worked at Starbucks. Did you know, while you were in college or right after, what you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, I mean, right after college, I knew that I needed to prove something to myself and become a professional. Now, I was really good at tax law, which really, again, doesn't make a lot of sense. But I loved studying tax law. So I took a job at a place called Ernst and Winnie at the time. Now it's called Ernst & Young. And I did my stint there. I could wear my suit. I had a, briefcase and a red tie, and I had a yellow tie. And I experienced that life. And I did that really to make my family proud too, because that was just, wow, that was as high as you can go. And then I quit because I wanted to go and find what I was meant to do. And so I took off for Africa. And
what was the experience like working at Starbucks? And at what point was that? Was that in college?
Yeah, during college, and this was before Howard. I mean, we'd seen him a couple times. He was a sales guy. We knew, everyone in Seattle kind of knew that there was something bubbling in the coffee space. It was like the very early years of, let's say, a certain musical sound. Like you knew that this was popping, but you didn't know how it was going to play out.
Like grunge.
Like grunge, and it was just, and I loved it because I had to push really hard at Starbucks to become a barista. They didn't want me to do it because, well, I looked like a farm boy at the time, right? So, and I looked like a grunge guy. That's what grunge really is, right? It's just farm. We wear farm clothes, and people call it a fashion. It's hilarious. And so I jumped ship, and I went to a place called Espresso Roma, and they were from Berkeley, and they loved kids like me, long haired, like big boots and shorts and a shirt tied around their waist. And they said, "Yeah, this is what we want." And so I became a barista, and I freaking loved it. It was like being a DJ. It was just the greatest. And I knew, man, when I got into being a professional later, I just missed it all. I missed the seed. I missed the machines. I missed the interaction with people. And I missed being that DJ. I wanted to go back, but I wanted to peel this onion in a different way.
Did you love coffee? I mean, like, or was it just a part of your job and that's kind of what it was? Because nowadays, I mean, everybody and every kid is like, oh my God, I love coffee and I can't live without coffee. Pat and I are, not 30 years old yet, so we don't really know what those days were like. But give us kind of an idea of what the coffee scene was like and what people, was it even talked about, or was it just coffee? I mean, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning, I only recognized it as something I could do, right? So the first job was dragging sacks, and I'd done that on the farm. I knew how to move grain sacks. So I thought, well, because guys, by this time, I had never been to a restaurant. I'd never done anything. I had no qualifications, so here I am in the big city looking for I couldn't sell you shoes. I mean, I couldn't help you try on clothes. I mean, I couldn't serve you food. I couldn't make your food. So here's the job I understood: moving that bag from A to B. Now, when I got in there and I noticed the names on the bags, that started shifting my attention. It started like countries that I knew the names of and where they were. There's Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, Peru, and I realized, wow, these things have touched those places that I want to go. Their origins, right, are this the world that I've always dreamt of. And so it started capturing my imagination because I knew perhaps this was a vehicle back to those places. Somehow I could ride on this train. And so obviously, the flavors of it and where it could go was a big part of the experience. But for me, it was deeper than that. This was the bean represented a potential roadmap to my life. And I grabbed onto it and I just didn't want to let it go.
When you quit the tax job, what did you do? Or I mean, did you have any plan, or was this your time to just kind of travel the world?
Yeah, no, the plan was I wanted to go back to coffee. And my best friend at the time, we had talked a lot about, what we thought the perfect coffee company would look like. And it was all theoretical, right? The first thing we thought was, you got to go to the farm. And because we knew, or I knew, that if I worked farms my whole life, that if you took the time to drive your truck up to our farm or the farm I was working on, you were going to get the best stuff. That's it. You know it because, you put the other stuff through the distribution chain. And so I said, well, you got to go to the farm. So that was a very naive way of saying direct sourcing. And then, I realized that, the best that coffee had to offer in the United States was really reflective of how, we kind of approached it. And it didn't really include all those things that Europe had been working on for so long. Now, keep in mind, this was 1988, where our beer was crap, our cheese. I think we had two kinds of cheese, orange and white. Our bread sucked. This was culinary America in the 80s was, oh my God, it was what you get at, a low end grocery store. And the best stuff though was coming in the Northeast, and it was all influenced by Europeans, mostly the French and the Italian. So I said, why aren't we looking to the French and Italian to really learn our skills about coffee? So I knew the answer lied between Italy, France, and Africa. So I left and I indentured myself to folks in order to learn it.
Yeah, talk to us about what you saw. I mean, like when you said you went to Africa first, right? What was that trip like?
Well, the first thing I recognized was that the farms were in really dire straits in terms of how they got their product to market, that they received very little for what they were doing. And there was so much more that could be had in terms of quality, but the farmer they were getting just a fraction, and that it wasn't anything like I had anticipated, that it's all just this brokered bean that you end up getting. So I knew right away that we needed to break that down, that we needed to create relationships with farms. And that was a big aha moment for me. And then in Europe, I realized we needed profile roast. And so I put those together. And, now I think America has the best beer in the world, because what we did is we go to Europe, we figure it out, and then we jack it into the American level, right? We take it to the next logical level. We've done that with our cheeses and wines and beers, and we did it with coffee. And it's that built that really simple farm boy way of approaching problems. But that's the pieces I saw. I thought, I need to learn from the masters, and then I need to teach the masters.
And at this point, had you already met Jean-Philippe, who was your co-founder, or did that come after? You had?
Yeah, because when we were kicking around in the coffee scene, he was working for another company, and there weren't a lot of foreign people around at that time. And I heard this French dude, and he was I thought maybe he had one of the magic, kind of formulas for coffee. Instead, he just knew how to cook food like I did. And so we kind of bonded over the fact that I have a gas stove, and we cooked, and we drank whiskey and cooked and played cards and just dreamed together. And then eventually, we got some money together and exercised our dreams.
It's something that, you can come across other people that have similar interests and just things that perhaps you have in common that you can talk about or just hang out around. But to actually have the courage and perhaps like the will to go out and venture off and start a business, isn't as common, like truly, like, people say they want to start a business or I want to be an entrepreneur, but when it actually comes down to it, they don't take that leap, or for whatever reason. What do you think was sort of the reasoning behind, like, do you think it was just serendipity that you guys sort of clicked, or was there something more to it than that?
Yeah, I mean, we clicked as friends, and over the no. I mean, you can imagine this. It's what, 1986, and there's not a foodie in the world. There's no foodies. There's zero foodies. You have this love of food that's just no one quite understands, and a lot of it is the celebration that you have it, or you have some cash to actually buy it and make it. And you meet another guy, the only one ever in the entire city of Seattle, who took it as seriously as I did. He knew, what like zucchini flour, fried in oil tastes like. And I'm like, oh my God, like you're the only other person that it's like you see in color, and you meet someone who can see in color, and you're, oh my God. And you become very, very close. You become brothers. And then, he's from France, so he was alone in the United States, and I was in Seattle. I was alone there, so we became not only brothers, we became, friends. We became brothers, and then you just kind of knew at one point that the trajectory of our lives were going to parallel. And it's 27 years of La Colombe later, we still share the same office.
And this was while you were in college and working at Starbucks, or?
By then, yeah, I was still working at coffee, but I was working at espresso.
So when you went off and worked, in tax law and Ernst & Young, what was Jean-Philippe doing at that time?
Well, he's a couple years younger, so he had to finish his degree. He was studying to be a pilot, which, by the way, is a great degree to get if you're a coffee roaster, because there's a lot of similarities. Checklists and doing things precisely. I mean, you can't one roast, hit the ground, next one, right? So I'd given him, and then it took me some time to put the money together. And so by the time I got my money together, ironically, the coffee company he was working with sold, and he graduated. And I said, well, it's time. The stars are lining up. We're going to Philly.
Todd, you had never started a business by this time that you started La Colombe, and you've worked in the scene, but hadn't necessarily, I assume, raised money to start a company. And from what you've been discussing, coffee wasn't necessarily what it is today. How did you, how were you able to raise money? How much did you raise, and what was the pitch to investors?
Oh yeah, well, I failed to raise money for my company for the first 20 years. The seed capital, which was $100,000, I did the old-fashioned way. I embraced poverty. I was as close as you can come to homeless, but still cool. I had a little boat that I lived on in the south of France that I paid no money for, and all of my money went into either I ate fish because it was a fishing port, right? So I lived on like $100 a month. And meanwhile, I worked my ass off. So I collected $100,000 and came back to America. But I was 10 and I was looking good. I was fit. But and then even when I got to Philly, I took an apartment across the street. They used to have what they called the projects here on 13th and Lombard. And there were 3 towers. And I found a tiny, like the size of, let's say, a parking stall, right? Apartment, had a little fridge and a hot plate in it and a futon. And I lived in that for 4 years. I just embraced poverty.
Yeah. And I can imagine around this time, whether it's kids from perhaps like in high school or college, or even when you're at Ernst & Young, like your colleagues are like sort of coming, perhaps going deeper into their careers and maybe making a lot of money. And you're sort of over here trying to build a business. And at the same time, like you said, having to sort of embrace poverty in the meantime. Did you ever feel any sort of like, were you afraid at all, or were you worried at all, or were you looking at other people and comparing yourself and like driving yourself crazy, or were you very much on this one track mind of I'm going to do this and doesn't matter what everyone else is doing, I'm fine where I am?
Yeah, I guess this is going to sound weird. I mean, really, I've done 4 startups all within the same company. The first one was the origin story of our first little cafe. And as you move forward, I think the last one was really, like I said, like 2008, where, I got the company to be worth millions and it was really doing well, but I decided I wanted to put it into orbit now. And so I went out and I invented kind of ready to drink, coffee in a can. I got the patents and the prototypes, and I had to gamble the whole damn thing on it. And that was scary to me because this time, if I fall from a height. The first time you just trip and fall on the sidewalk. It's like, well, I just blew 3 years
Right.
putting underground together. This
You
one,
don't have as much to lose.
yeah. So I do have sympathy for those sorts of people in that condition because I've experienced it. Here I was, I'm a father of 4. I got a wife, and I still have family that I'm responsible for back home, and I have all this stuff. But I really want to do this thing. I think that I can get in the top 3 in America in this ready to drink. And I had to push everything on the table, and it's fucking nightmarish. So
as everyone else is going to be listening to this story, obviously, now I'm listening to it and just trying to process how crazy this all is, because now you think about, starting a company and everybody tells you the first thing you have to do, is put together a business plan and go raise money, but then you hear stories like the one that you're telling right now, where you literally had to just eat shit for God knows how many years and work hard and grind, just, the old fashioned way, I guess, but really the way that you own the process and you own the company, and you don't have to really hear from other investors about how you should be running your company. Right.
Yeah.
But, talk to us about the early days of La Colombe, right? How did you come up with the name? Why did you decide to go to Philadelphia? What were those early conversations like between you and your business partner, and how did you eventually launch?
Yeah. Well, first, when I decided that I was to write the business plan down, and I did that, but literally with the pen, it was like graphs. We wrote that, and there was not a name. And there were some thoughts. First, I knew we were going to source coffee, so we wanted to have a symbol that meant peace, and that was really important. If you spend time in the most isolated parts of the most isolated countries, you find that folks don't normally speak the language of their country, and they don't read and write, right? So communicating is always going to be a challenge, but symbolism is really key, right? And so I wanted to make sure we had a symbol that meant the international, understanding of peace, and for the most part, that is the dove. I knew that going in, but then it clicked on so many other levels because JP's very first job, washing dishes, and he was like 15, was at a place in Saint-Paul-de-Vence that is known for the art on the walls. Artists used to leave art there at the end of a season to pay their bed and breakfast bills. And it's called La Colombe d'Or. And if you'd like to see Matisse, Renoir, and all these amazing painters, they're all there in this bed and breakfast. And it's La Colombe. And then we kept seeing all these similarities with La Colombe, and it kept tying. So then when we went, hey, man, the universe is talking to us. It's got to be La Colombe, which means the dove of peace.
Wow. Interesting. So when you first open up, what's the vibe like? I mean, is it like, are people just kind of flooding in, or did it take a while for it to take off?
Well, I mean, like most startup entrepreneurs know, the entire universe thinks you're going to fail, because that's what they think. And that's something you have to ignore because that's why the opportunity exists, right? It's because everyone thinks it's going to fail. So if there is this space.
If everyone thought it was going to succeed, then everyone would be doing the same thing.
Yeah, then it would be flooded, right? There were a lot of people who you could see, like, they felt sorry for us. Like, how could this work? Because, Philly was on its knees, man. This was like the height of crack cocaine. It was harsh. It was a bitter, hard place, but perfect for us. And, when people came in, they kind of went, oh, these guys are putting their heart into this, and this is going to be just a tragic tale, I can tell you. Day one, we opened the door, and there were a lot of people who felt that way because they saw us physically do the work. We didn't hire anyone to do any of the labor, right? To kind of support the local guys. And we had a day, and I remember it was $287. Now La Colombe does that in about 10 seconds, right? But it was like,
Yeah.
and we were over the moon because we thought, hey, because we thought our break even was like 400 and we were halfway there. That was the reasoning. And we celebrated. I remember because we were still cheap. We went and shared a 40 ouncer, like literally, that's how bad it was, and said, we did it. Like, we did it. We're there. Yeah.
How far were you thinking at that point? Like, were you thinking like, oh, we're going to start here and then we're going to start expanding? Like, were you thinking that far ahead, or were you just, I'm happy with this one shop that we're opening up and we're just going to focus on this, and you weren't really thinking too deep, too far into the future?
No, we were thinking big. I mean, within 3 weeks, the local newspaper came in and asked us what we were up to. And I said, well, we are the most influential coffee roasting company in the United States of America. It's just no one knows us yet. And I said, we are the standard. And they were like, you crazy. I mean, I was riffing like freaking, Musk, because I just said, we might be tiny maybe, but we're going. What we wanted to do and what really bugged us was that we were food guys. And we used to read about the great chefs and the food. And like, we were just weird how we were, right? I mean, just like some kids have Dungeons and Dragons. We had food. And what bothered us is that when you looked at a linen table, what you saw at the time is there were three things that had no identity. There was your salt, there was your pepper, and your coffee. They had no story. There was no origin, and there was nothing. They were just commodities. They were just commodities. And we set out to decommoditize the coffee experience on the linen table. And within the end of that first year, we were doing 90% of the best chefs in the country. It burned fire. I mean, it burned fast. It was the first was Georges Perrier, the number one chef of the country that time. Then we sold number two the same day. And then it was Jean-Georges, Danny Meyer, all of them. Just
Where were they sourcing their coffee from before? It was just like some generic branded coffee that.
Yeah, it's the same stuff that you would get at a diner. It's just that there was no differentiation. And you would bring a coffee in and make it for chef, and it was great. We didn't have brochures or anything. We would just go in. People would stop us, and we would say, "We're here to make coffee for chef." And I swear to God, you can go into any place in the world and say that sentence, and they will let you go in and do whatever you want. So we'd go in, we'd make a beautiful coffee, and then we'd go find chef. He would say, "What are you doing?" And we'd say, "We're here to make you a coffee." We'd put it in front of him and just step back. And then he would drink and go, "What the hell was that?" And that's how we would sell.
I'm guessing, it sounds like there were no other coffee companies sort of trying to go that B2B route where it's like, we're going to go to these restaurants and establishments as opposed to just selling to, customers walking in the door.
Yeah, because, Howard came in with this idea that he wanted to build a cafe in every corner. So that was everybody doing that. But they were neglecting the place that we liked. So what happened is we became really, really important in the culinary scene. Really important. But still, we only had one little cafe in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and at this point, where was Starbucks? Like, had they had that vision of Howard come to life already? Like, was there Starbucks on every corner at this point, or it was just sort of building at that?
It was. They'd come to. I think they came to New York in '97. So we had some years, and it took them a while for Philly. But then, the whole Green Mermaid was let loose later on. But then they dabbled in B2B, but they just don't have the mentality for it, and they don't have the grit and the grind. It's a hard place. The kitchens in the 90s, like I said, I was raised by a bipolar woman, so I was perfectly suited for the kitchens of the 90s. I mean, my skin is so thick. And JP, his father was a purveyor, so he was raised around that same high amperage chef that would go in and out of these kitchens. So a lot of people are a little bit more tender, had a hard time in that space. And if you don't understand the concept of endurance, like you could be somewhere until 1 a.m. working on it. And then the chef wants you back in at 5 a.m. You got to have this love for endurance and really thick skin. And so we cut our teeth in that environment. And so when we decided to, build 30 cafes, it seemed easy. It was just really easy.
So, Todd, you launched the cafe in 1994, and then, within half a year or so, you obviously realized that there's a big need here for the restaurant culinary space, and so you open up a warehouse and start producing, coffee for restaurants around the country, I assume, right?
Yeah.
What was that experience like, and how fast or how slow was La Colombe growing?
Well, La Colombe has always kept a really nice, growth pace. At the beginning, the first couple of years, it was like drinking from a fire hose. That's for sure. Um, it was just keeping up with it and managing it. A lot of moving parts, and we weren't organized in the classic corporate way either. It was a monarchy. It was two of us and then people. So we interacted directly with all of our employees, and we didn't have managers, and we didn't have titles, and it was a very beautiful time for, I think, for me. And we grew to a pretty substantial size just doing it that way.
Mm. When I'm curious, when you was that B2B side, like when perhaps people went to restaurants that carried La Colombe coffee, did they see the brand? Like, did they see that they were drinking La Colombe, or was it like brandless to them at that time? Because I'm curious, like, was there any sort of cross promotion where like that eventually led them to, like the coffee to then come into the store, or perhaps buy your products down the line?
I mean, they do. I mean, when we started first, coffee was selling into restaurants for about $1.75 to $2 a pound, right? And we started selling in at $7.50, and because, hey man, this was the good stuff, right? Which
Mm.
was really quite crazy. And the second thing is you would actually charge the roaster to put their name on your menu. And so we said, no, you're gonna pay us to put our name on your menu. That's how it works. And so what I found was that was probably, wait, it sounds bizarre, but then you would kind of negotiate it and like, well, okay, maybe you pay a week early, and we ended up only on the very best. So I didn't have to deal with being on a menu where I don't, it's like, come on, guys, you're trying to hang your brand on mine. Instead,
Right.
you would
Yeah.
go to, I don't know, Le Bernardin, and there it would be. And I
Mm.
like
Like
that.
it's a privilege to carry La Colombe coffee in your
Yeah.
restaurant.
Now, you didn't do it for your personal ego or for, what you did it is because you're trying to redefine what the role coffee should be playing on your table. And that it would basically, we're advocating for, that bean, which represents to me the folks who have worked their butts off to make it that way.
And Todd, for how many years did you run La Colombe with this business, right? The B2B business? Because I'll be honest, I first learned about La Colombe, it was probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago,
Mhm.
uh, maybe a little longer, at my Whole Foods store when I saw the really cool cans with, that probably patented lip or patent pending lip. I think at the time it was still patent pending. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
But I just loved it, and I picked it up, and I just couldn't put it down. I kept buying it day after day, and it basically just replaced my daily coffee in the mornings, whether I was going to school or work. And that's how I found out about it. But prior to that, I had never heard of La Colombe. Right? For
Mm-mm.
me, it was Starbucks, Coffee Bean, Pete's, not even Phil's, and then just the random coffee shops in our neighborhood. I know you mentioned it earlier, but what happened during that pivot, or not even pivot, but just the addition of this new CPG product?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is a lot of things that come together, and it's true. Over the last 5 years, when I invented the draft latte, so there is the lip piece, right? But inside of it is technology that no one else has to actually foam the beverage and create the mouthfeel that you're looking for in a latte. Um, and I was searching something out because I knew there was another kind of level of our orbit I needed to find, and I found that. It was a lot of it based on the understanding that I'm watching coffee consumption going from hot to cold, and then having the nerve to build my own factory, to lay down all my patents and bring it in and roll it out. And now it's in, I think, maybe 80% of all stores in America.
Wow.
Let me tell you, brothers, that was the jackknife. I mean, let me tell you, the G's from that are just outrageous. It just, oh my God, it almost pulled the skin off my face. Just, I mean, And both in terms of, awareness, it's in terms of just gross sales. I mean, when you see a day's work, like 28 18-wheelers leave your plant,
That's crazy.
and you started out in a cafe with a little roaster, it's mind-boggling. Um, but
Why
it
did it
was.
take so long then? Why did it take so long to do that? Or was it the fact that you were working on this technology and that took long, right? Like what in your head said we got to do something differently? Like we're doing fine, we're growing at a steady pace, but it's time to, just fucking fly, right? Like I
Yeah,
assume, your partner had a lot to do with, this flight stuff because you said he was studying to be a pilot.
yeah.
But, what changed? I mean, something must have flipped. Some switch must have just kind of flipped in your head that said it's time to go big, right? Go even bigger.
Yeah, but I don't think that the objective was bigness. That's not the objective. The objective is you're trying to, I'd like to influence the world around me. I want to influence coffee. And I started that work with hospitality and did. And then I said, hey, what is this thing, internet? Let's get on. Wait, we should do something. Whoa, oh, so we created that platform. And that's a freaking business on its own. I mean, that thing is just, I mean, anyone would love that business. I mean, millions a week and all these connections around the country. And then you say, well, I don't think we're retailers. We're more like purveyors. We belong in the service of other people. But let's try to open another cafe in New York and see what happens. Bam, it blows. Two blows. They're all hitting. And I don't know if you've seen, but it's like standing in line at, when the new Apple phone comes in from here to Beverly Hills. It's crazy. So we went, wow, we've redefined that space. And then I look around and see the world wasn't ready for this. Because listen, in the mid 90s, if someone came into my cafe in 19th Street, I'll always remember, there's a guy in a suit and he asked for an iced latte. And I thought he'd been hit on the head with a hockey puck. That is the weirdest thing I'd ever heard, right? It was like asking for a, really hot beer. It's like, where does this come from? So I made it, but that was pretty much the total cold sales that year. And year after year, I watched it climb. So when I came back from Bolivia, I thought, because I'd seen this woman cold brewing her coffee, and I thought, that's what we have to do. We need to cold brew. So I start this whole cold brew, and that touched off. And you all of a sudden you saw a lot of copycats and cold brew kind of fragmented. And I went, you know what? You got to get the king of all drinks in the cafe world is the latte. And what defines a latte is texturized mouthfeel. It's the foam. So I said, all right, now we have enough folks drinking cold. Now we have an understanding you can put coffee in a bottle or a can through the cold brew. I just need to figure out how we can get foam out of that can. And by accident, my 4-year-old taught me. And I went, all right, let's do
crazy.
it.
What do you mean? Tell us that story real quick.
Well, I mean, so I'm trying to figure out, I mean, like you can't use this Guinness thing. You can't use, there's a lot of stuff that's going on. And it was just simple. So, I realized that you can't super saturate your product like you would do with, let's say, effervescent drinks like sparkling water and then package it and close it. You can't do that because of the milk components and the coffee components, et cetera, right? And then my son, I'm teaching him how to eat out of the refrigerator without his mom knowing, right? Like every skill a young man needs to have, like, see that, touch that, she'll know. But over here, like you could take pickles, she'll never figure that out, right? And I'm just jokingly going through, and he goes, how about that? It was a whipped cream can. And I goes, yeah, you can get away with just a little bit though. So I tilt his head back and I blast some whipped cream into his mouth. And I knew. And now I knew how to do it. That's texturized milk, baby. I just need to control it. I just need to control it.
It's crazy. We talk about it all the time. Like, since launching La Colombe in the last even 10, 15, maybe even 5 years, we've seen so many different brands come out, whether it's actual physical locations, CPG, this company gets bought out for $1 billion and that, and this, like just all coffee. And so, and they're all, so it seems like everyone's doing well. And I'm curious, like, why, how is that possible? Because there's so many other, I guess, parts of the industry that you could point out where it's like, once it becomes so saturated, everyone just sort of, it's like a zero-sum game. How is it that coffee, all these brands seem to be sustaining really well and have their like hardcore customer bases?
Well, I mean, first you got to realize how big coffee is. I mean, it's so massive. It is the big white whale of all beverages. I mean, think of this. If you take all beverages combined, without not water, right? But all beverages, so beer, sodas, all of them, kombucha, lemonade, anything you can drink, it doesn't add up to half of what coffee is. This is a coffee nation. We drink on average 17 ounces of it a day. And that includes babies. So someone's making up for the babies, right? This is a huge, huge, huge island. And not one or two or five companies can cater to all that. And then you have a moving target. It's not like you make your cornflakes and then your cornflakes rule and cornflakes rule forever. No, this is not the world anymore. People migrate, their flavors change, and it's a constant evolving thing. So you see companies come in and out. Now, also it's like plate tectonics. There's a place on Earth where we're developing more surface, and there's the ones that are absorbing it. If you go 10 years ago, all those companies have been bought. All those people I used to compete against, they're not very competitive anymore because fat cats own them and don't really care. Mm-hmm. And so they're slowly dying a death. And then so there's a new crop that's coming. Now for me,
and see, that's another thing. Yeah.
No, go ahead, please.
I was going to say that's another thing. It's like once these big companies are in charge and perhaps the innovation is slower in other areas like technology, for example, we get bought out. Sometimes the innovation isn't there anymore when the founders initially were very scrappy and always trying to figure out how to innovate. How does that translate over to coffee? I mean, in terms of innovation, is it just like these different types of coffee drinks that, fuse with other things that people are creating that is going to be the future of it? Or how does one innovate within the coffee category in your opinion?
Well, I mean, first you have to accept one sentence and decide if it's true or not. And we do. And I drive my people crazy with this sentence. And it's this: nothing is ever finished. You have to believe that or not. Now, if you truly believe that in your soul, that means, because coffee is overlooked. Like, what could you possibly do with coffee? I heard that 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, well, baby, look what we did. I mean, look, I helped pioneer the third coffee, origin, going to origin, the third wave coffee movement, cold brew movement, draft latte, tap systems. I mean, and I said, well, we've participated or created a lot of major change. Now, am I going to think just because I'm 57, it's over? No, are you kidding? It's just never done. It's just never, ever done. Now, why is it easier for founder-led companies to innovate? It's the same reason that the best tech companies can. Because if the person at the top understands the product they make, you're an innovative company. Bill Gates could code like a freak, right? And that's why you had all of that. Jobs, a freak. You look at all these really, really good companies, Google, Facebook, all these guys know their product. They're not sitting isolated somewhere and R&D is like in the basement behind the boiler. As soon as you get a leader at top that does not actually intimately know the product, you can say goodbye to your innovation. And I dare you, unless they buy it. Big companies will do that. They'll let some small companies innovate. They'll come in and buy it. So their R&D department is their M&A.
Right.
Is that something that you think La Colombe will be focused on in the future as well, or no?
What, to buy other people on their ideas? No, I don't think so. We had an experience early on. There was a small company, and we helped someone out of a jam, and we ended up like buying the company and paying them over time, and it was awful because I tried to combine two cultures, and that's just impossible. Like, one culture has to die, and they don't die easily.
Yeah,
very true.
Yeah.
Todd, when it comes, for me at least, we've talked to so many founders and obviously all of them have some sort of company or brand or whatever. But for me, and I don't really compliment much on the podcast, but La Colombe has been so consistent in my life, at least in, what I consume in terms of, usually in the mornings, but you guys have done such a good job of constantly bettering yourselves and obviously that's something that you just mentioned right now, that nothing's ever done, right? That we have to keep going on, keep getting better, whether it's adding new flavors or adding new product lines or adding new retail stores, and just even where those stores are located, right? It's just so obvious that there is a lot of attention to detail. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of concern for and attention to what the customer wants, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though you guys are focused on the product, it's still about the customer, right? Does that
Mm-hmm.
come from you? Does that come from the top? Or is that just something that, every team member is, taught to, be like, right? Talk to us a little bit about La Colombe's
Yeah.
culture and how decisions are made and how ideas come to life.
Well, first, I think a good company is this kind of reservoir for the best of yourself. If you're the founder and CEO, and there is something that I know about myself, and is that I want to reside on this curve where I'm evolving. I mean, we're talking, you're talking about a kid who had never been to a restaurant. And I've evolved a lot since then. So I knew I was never finished. And the person who starts a little cafe with a little roastery and one that runs a $1 billion company with 1,200 employees, not the same person. You need to evolve. You need to evolve faster than your company. You need to be better. Every day you need to be better than you were yesterday. Your biggest challenger is that person last week, right? So, and I think I display that a lot, and I do kind of demand it. I demand it from the things around me, and I will drive you crazy. My process is very fatiguing. I will go over it and over it and over it and over it, and people just start losing. But then they realize that's the process. So
Right.
if that's 2 millimeters, I see that D in that font, and does that look like it's Helvetica? Because it should be something, and then once they see you do that, people do it. Now, the point isn't the product. The product isn't the point. Now, this is what I criticized, what we call the third wave movement, where everybody was discovering all the different flavors that coffees by themselves could have. And it kind of turned into a navel gazing. It's all about the bean. And they lost sight of this was all about, making people happy with coffee. So our aspiration, and it's been clear from the very beginning, again, it's another thing I repeat over and over, that we aspire to influence the world by making people happy with coffee. If you notice, coffee is the last word, not the first word. Now, it's a tool for a purpose. And what's our purpose? And that purpose is happiness. And if you can make enough people happy, you can influence the world around you. And that's the recipe. And when I say the sentence, nothing is ever finished, I say, especially me. I always say, especially me. So I'm telling everyone around me that I'm not done yet with me.
Yeah.
And
I'm curious, Todd.
Mhm.
Yeah, even like now, but also when you were starting off, and we talked about the grunge movement and everything that was happening, in Seattle, and when you were just starting off, and even up until now, what do you do to stay inspired? Like, where do you turn to? What do you enjoy consuming, or
Yeah.
enjoying experiencing that continues to inspire you to be the best version of yourself, to do great work?
Well, like I think I don't think I'm unique in this way. I'm aware constantly every day that I'm going to die. And my God, what can be more inspiring than that? You're going to die. Fuck it. You better get it done now then. I mean, this is just what I'm saying. You better. Death is the most inspiring thing. I drive my wife crazy, so I like chopper motorcycles, and I have a circuit that I'll run around all the cemeteries because I want to remind myself that's where I'm going to be. And you get off your chopper, man, you're ready to tear it up because it's like, come on, don't waste your turn. Quit being so afraid. Don't let the details get to you. Try to live as good as you can, and live life to the fullest. And that doesn't mean like overeat and stuff like that, but it means, come on, man, take advantage of every opportunity you have while it's still here. And then I turn, and I'm a father. My wife and I adopted 4 children from Ethiopia, and I don't know you guys if you have children yet, but my little guy, my girls, dude, like you get to see life fresh again, and you get inspired, and you want to be, the greatest that you possibly get to. I don't want them to see their dad in slippers, depressed, shuffling around the house. No, I want them to see their father taking on the world. And that inspires me to show them that, to reflect that, and to instill that sort of thinking into them. And, don't count your money until the damn thing's over. And I'm going to count it or be intimidated by something. I won't let it happen. So those things together, the awareness that I'm going to be taking a long dirt nap soon, and I'm going to leave by 4 kids that I want to instill with the power of achievement. That's what inspires me.
Todd, it's so amazing to see where you came from and how life was like for you early on, which is why we asked those questions, to obviously where you are today, right? And, to me, when I think about you and how that journey played out, it was a little unreasonable. At times, it was a little crazy. It was risky, right? And it wasn't the conventional way that one would do things, especially given the position that you were in, right? A lot of people, when they're dealt a hand, that's the hand that they, carry the rest of their lives. You obviously said, you know what? I don't even want these cards. I don't even want to play this game. I'm going to go play another game, right? I want a whole other game. I don't even want to play poker with you guys. I don't need cards. I'm going to go get chips. I'm going to go get coffee beans, right? So what do you think made you this way, right? Like, how does one who perhaps was in a similar situation or is in a similar situation or is just trying to figure it out, how can they embrace that mindset that you had and still have? Should they be a little crazy? Should they intentionally be a little unreasonable? I mean, give us some sort of guidance there.
Well, I mean, first you have to measure your need, and what do you need? My need was pressing. I needed to create an environment that a guy like me could operate in. Now, I say that because remember, you can imagine when you're the son of 2 bipolar people, one of whom killed himself, you're going to get some, you're going to get some of that in you, right? And so it means that I have to deliberately take care of my brain. It means that I don't think like most people, and living in a cube, you don't put a brain like that in a cube, right? So I needed to find and create a universe that a guy like me could do well, and I couldn't see one around it. So it was a necessity that I could have an environment where I could live. I needed my own universe. And it was very obvious to me after doing 2 years at the accounting firm that, I was a little golden boy. I could work 4 straight nights without going to sleep. But I had a hard time being consistent, right? Just I knew I couldn't do that. And it was going to stunt my career dramatically. So my need was huge. So if you measure your need first. So if you need something really, really bad, I don't even think I have to nudge you very far. Now, if it's something you'd like, wow, it's going to be hard to get off. It's going to be hard to gamble on that one. So first what you measure your need is. And if it's just for wealth, I don't know if it's worth it. I don't know if, I don't know if you really, really, really need wealth. Yeah. But if it's just for wealth, I don't know how anyone could follow through with that. And I also don't think it has anything. All the time people say, Todd, you're so passionate. It's your passion. Yeah, that's not true. It has nothing to do with passion. It has zero to do with passion. Sure, I get passionate once in a while, but hey, passion is a human emotion, and there's nothing as unreliable than a human emotion. They come and go. And let me tell you, you don't walk 700 miles across Antarctica or work 27 years in coffee because of this fleeting emotion. You do it for another reason. And in my case, it's need and something else. As soon as you do something with all your might for a while, it just becomes an obsession. And when that takes over, dude, you're golden. You're golden. The rest is just movement.
It's a misconception that, people think passion always comes before the fact, but never think about it the other way around, where it's like, once, like to your point, once you're obsessed with it, once it's something that you're in this sort of state of flow that you've put yourself in and things are just working out and you're good at it and, things are clicking, the stars seem to be aligning, like that's sort of also something that could develop passion.
Yeah.
Once, after the fact. So, I mean, given that point though, like, what, I guess, are there other things that you are actually passionate about other than coffee? Like, do you see yourself doing other things in terms of business ventures or projects or anything like that? Or do you still see a lot of opportunity within La Colombe and continuing that
Yeah.
path?
I mean, yeah, I should say, so yeah, like I said, one of my heroes is Newton, right? And so I knew something about him that during the plague, Cambridge said, go home and quarantine. And when he was under quarantine, he, he created basically physics and, our understanding of the natural world, the principles of science. And, this guy used that time to change the trajectory of mankind, right? Which is, I thought, well, that's what I should do too. So I invented a new form of mathematics. No, I'm kidding. I built.
I was like, it's all over the world are about to hate you real quick.
I created the unified theory of mathematics, and no, I've been down in my lab working on different projects, and I'm doing it under the guidance of my children, and I'm really beginning to create some astounding things that I think deserve a life of their own, and they're really important, and I can't I don't think that I'll die without giving them life. I'm really interested in making sure La Colombe is taken care of, and I drive that ship. And right now, it's a tough ship to drive, right? But talk about obsession. I sleep maybe 2.5 hours a night since COVID, and I drive my wife completely around the bend. I don't eat breakfast or lunch. I have dinner with family. I do homework. I run kids to hockey and gymnastics, and I'm downstairs in my lab, pushing. It feels like walking across Antarctica.
How do you do that on 2.5 hours of sleep?
Yeah, I do these mini naps during the day, like literally in the chair that I'm sitting in to talk to you. I just can bend down. I sleep for 15 minutes. I wake up and I get to the next meeting, and because I know it won't last forever, but I'm chasing a dragon right now, and if you let him go, you might not be able to grab it, right? So it's when you're in that throes of the mechanical side of invention, and you're working with things that no one's ever worked with before, you feel like you're going to lose the genius thread. So you can't stop, because if it's like, maybe it's the same for like Brian Eggers, right? Great book, heartbreaking work of staggering genius. Like he knew that if he slid up a second, he would lose the thread. So he just kept hammering on his keys, and it turned out to be a beautiful, beautiful work. And so I kind of feel that way.
I know you've been super involved in, philanthropy and other, social causes in your career. What are some of those things that you've been working on or have worked on, and that you, truly, truly support and, really believe in, that could change the world? Because I know that for you, one of the things that clearly is a purpose for you is making an impact, not only, on the world, but also just in your life, to your, immediate circle of people. So talk to us a little bit about that, and would
Yeah.
love to hear more about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, why you do it, like I shun the words philanthropy and all that. I think it's more just decency. I'm very aware that if you get the opportunity to create another human, that you want to inject, decency into that person, right? And you get this opportunity when you create a company. It's an entity. It has the legal rights of a human. So what are you going to inject into it? And I think decency is one of the key components. That they understand that if you're doing well, you should look around to see what you can do to improve the conditions around you in the communities. Now, a lot of that happens at the farm, but that's just, hey, that's family. They're family. You're trade partners, so you're going to do stuff there. The rest is also, in a way, you feel like you're triaging, right? So there's so much need around the world, and there's so much stuff that's going the wrong way, and then you have to kind of get your priorities together. And the first one is, for me, and it's key, there's 158 million children without family. I know, I went into the foster system. You don't want that. Being alone as a child is a terrible, terrible thing. And so we want to do as much as we can to chip away at that, and I know that, my kids are adopted, and I didn't do that to save the world. I did that to build a family, but it means something to them because they know what an orphanage feels like. So it's something we can participate with as a family. Second level is hunger. And the third is it's mental illness in America. So those three things I know those things. I know all three of those things. And I just think, well, maybe the universe has been kind to me because it would like me to do something about this as much as I can. So I will, and, I know I had a good friend. I couldn't say mentor because I never had one of those, but he became a good friend. His name is Ed Snyder, and he was the owner of the Flyers, which is, anyway, I'm a hockey guy. And he kind of started a company that became Comcast. It's like, so he was a really successful dude. And unfortunately, was never heard of Comcast. Never. What is that? So he, as you can imagine, he did pretty well in life. And he started this youth hockey league. Now, so this guy has, done everything. He's done it all. And he's on his deathbed. And he said, that's the only thing I really did well. And I looked at that. It was his family and what he was able to give other people. And I went, okay, I'm not going to wait until I die to do that. Right? Like, I'm going to start now.
Yeah, I read a book recently, actually. And one of the things, it was like a philosophical book. And one of the things, as every philosophical book sort of talks about, is like the meaning of life and happiness and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that it sort of whittled down to was contribution to others. Like that's what really brings you true happiness, is being able to contribute whatever skill you have, whatever mindset, great or big, great or small, to a group of people. It could be in your own household. It could be in your own community. It could be in a whole country. It could be anything. It's just like that contribution level that you're actually able to bring something to the table that makes an impact in someone else's life for the better, hopefully, is what really drives that happiness within yourself.
Yeah. I got to admit that I don't really remember ever going, wow, that really made me happy. I mean, but I think that it might helps me make sense of the universe a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Which kind of lends to contentment to some point. I'm an atheist, but I've read a great deal about all the different religions, and I do agree with one particular passage in the Christian faith that, to those who are given a lot, much is expected. And that rings very true to me because you got to understand. I mean, there are times I just look out at stars and go, wow, holy shit, can you believe this? Can you really fucking believe that this is crazy. Why? It's part of it. Oh, sure. Yeah. I worked really hard. My grandfather worked really hard. My grandfather died poor. It's like, and you go, a lot of it was dumb luck. But is it luck? So you go, why? And so I go, you know what? I'm going to do what those Christian people do because it's true. The world's unfair. Life is unfair. I know it because it's been unfairly good to me, right? It's like it. So it must be unfairly bad for people who deserve more. So let's get this thing going. Let's start helping level this playing field out a little bit more. And I'm not asking my government to do it, and I'm not, doing any of that. I'm saying maybe you should play your role. Maybe that's why.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, Todd, I'm sure we could sit here for hours on end and talk to you about La Colombe and your journey and everything in between. But obviously, your story is so inspirational to us, and I'm sure everyone who's listening is going to take something away from it for sure. And if they don't, they should listen again so that they take something away from it. But I guess before we sign off, for those that are thinking about starting something, or those that are as obsessive as you were with food and the culinary scene, and with that coffee bean, how would you advise someone that was, or is 27, 28, 30 years old, even older or younger? What would you tell them right now if they had some inkling of an idea? What's your advice?
Well, so you're talking about going on a grueling trek. So the first thing I would do is tell you to empty everything out of your backpack. everything out of it, and only put in the essentials. I mean, to give you an idea, when I climb mountains, I'll take a toothbrush and cut it in half. I mean, you want to be stripped down. And if you find that you have a huge load already that you can't put down, then I would rethink it, right? If you have 4 kids and a giant mortgage, that's going to be really hard. But if you strip it down, if you expect to carry in that backpack a beautiful lifestyle and with Instagram ready lifestyle and start it, it's going to be really hard. You have to have really strong legs for that. So I always say, strip down everything, put off everything. You got to feed the children before you eat, and your children is your company. And if you start with that mindset, you've just increased your probabilities of succeeding by 10. You will take less risk if you think that way. Don't worry, it'll get past, and trust me. Like, I don't live that way anymore. You will make up for it later. Like later on. Yeah, it'll be hard. Like, you don't even remember what coach feels like. And that right. You're postponing some of the gratification, but it's going to be so beautiful. And you'll have complete control of your life. And that's just something glorious. But break it down now. Stop, just get rid of it. If you have a car, sell it. If you have a sofa, sell it. You have a TV, sell it. Get rid of all your shit. Just break it down. You got books from college, sell those. Just like sell everything. You want to be able to move in on a dime, and you just strip everything down to its core.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's such timely advice, and this whole conversation I've gained so much out of, and it's so different than anything else we've done, any other interviews, just because I think your mindset is so unique and special. And I mean, I'm not surprised that you are where you are today, and I'm sure these are all things that you've learned over the years. But just like the way you approach your work and your life, I think it's something that everyone can take away and apply to whatever they're doing. And so we can't thank you enough, for hanging out with us and sharing it, and all the best to everything you're working on now. And we can't wait to see what else you do next.
All right, thank you guys. I really appreciate the time. I really do.
Thank you for your time.